This is the Logitech MX Master 4, the next generation of one of the most popular productivity mice ever. Now, I've been testing this new model for over a month now, and I have quite a few thoughts. I've also been an MX Master user for many years and have reviewed over a dozen mice on this channel, ranging from the super cheap discount mice up to the highest end productivity mice around. Now, Logitech did send this mouse over to me for review, but had no say in how I covered it. If you decide that this is the right mouse for you, there's affiliate links in the video description that help to support my channel and ensure that I can keep bringing you these highly detailed reviews. Even if you don't want the new mouse, if you find this video helpful in any way, clicking that subscribe button helps a ton. And now with that, let's jump into the details. Starting with build and design, the MX Master 4 features a recognizable design that's similar to prior MX Master mice, with a few small tweaks and improvements. The biggest of those design improvements is surely the materials. The soft touch materials used on the previous MX Master generations were disliked by many, as their luxurious feeling out of the box would oftentimes turn into a worn out or even sticky mess over time. To counteract that, the MX Master 4 now uses a hard plastic shell that will be much easier to clean. The main part of the body has a textured feel that still manages to feel high-end, though admittedly not as luxurious as the 3S. However, I still like the feel, and that texture provides some basic grip for your hand as well. The main left and right clicks are made of a smoother, slightly translucent plastic. This gives it a unique look, particularly along the edges of the main buttons. This smooth plastic also feels nice and works well as you click. On the sides, you'll find two sections of silicone, which again should be much more resilient and easier to clean than the old materials, while still feeling soft and comfortable to the touch. It's still too early to tell whether these new materials will have their own flaws when it comes to durability. At this point, I've been testing my MX Master 4 for over a month and haven't had any signs of wear and tear, but time will tell. Dimensionally, the MX Master 4 is a very similar size to the 3S. This means that it continues to be on the larger side, good for folks with medium to large sized hands, and potentially a bit challenging for people with smaller hands. The MX Master 3S was also considered to be quite heavy, coming in at 141 grams. The MX Master 4 manages to get even heavier, coming in at 150 grams. This is quite heavy for a mouse and largely stems from the addition of the Haptic engine, which we'll talk about soon. For some context on that 150 gram weight, the smaller MX Anywhere 3S weighs in at around 100 grams, and Logitech's Pro X Superlight 2 gaming mouse is just 60 grams. So that heavy weight definitely can feel a bit taxing, especially if you use a lower mouse sensitivity that requires larger movements to get your cursor across your screen. My personal recommendation, if you struggle with the weight, is to actually turn your sensitivity up higher than you're initially comfortable with. You'll adapt over time, and you can actually turn the heavy weight of this mouse into a bit of an advantage since it's a lot easier to make very fine movements with a heavier mouse like this. The shape of the new MX Master 4 is ergonomic without having the same dramatic tilted angle as a vertical mouse like the Logitech Lift or the MX Vertical. The result is a comfortable feel that's really easy to get used to, while being less intimidating than a vertical mouse for first-time users. Compared to the previous generation MX Master 3S, this new one is a bit less rounded with some sharper angles, and in particular, a long, flat segment running from the top of the mouse down to the front where the main clicks are. This is noticeable visually and can be felt when using the mouse, as your fingers cannot rest in quite as natural a position as on the 3S. Around the back, there's also a slight change in the shape. This one is harder to see, but in this general area, I find that the mouse sticks into your hand just a bit more, which makes it slightly less comfortable. As a result, I have found myself naturally using a grip that doesn't involve as much of the palm of my hand with the MX Master 4 compared to how I used to hold the 3S. For me, when I compare them side by side, I have a slight preference for the shape of the older MX Master 3 and 3S. However, given the durability improvements resulting from the material changes and the clean new look with the translucent main buttons, I'd say that the MX Master 4 is a pretty worthy follow-up in this mouse series. For colors, the regular MX Master 4 is available in 3 different colors. There's graphite, which I have here, plus black and pale gray. The 4 Mac version comes in 2 colors. This one here is the white silver, and then there is also a space black. But these are basically identical to the pale gray and black regular models. As a quick note, if you're thinking about buying the 4 Mac version, you should know that the regular and the 4 Mac are the same exact physical mouse. The only difference is that the 4 Mac version excludes the Logi Bolt receiver, but still sells for the same price. I don't think you should buy the 4 Mac unless you can find it on a discount. If you're confused and want to learn more, watch this video I made that explores those differences in a whole lot more detail. Moving on to buttons and wheels, we begin with the main left and right clicks. These use Logitech's Quiet Clicks technology, which makes them sound much quieter than a traditional mouse click. They're even a little bit quieter than the MX Master 3S, which also had quiet clicks. Here is a comparison between a standard click on the MX Master 3, the silent version 3S, and then the silent MX Master 4. Despite the slight change in sound, these are the exact same switches as what was in the MX Master 3S. It's important for me to call out that historically, users have had some issues with the MX Master switches having some failures. In some instances, that failure is simply caused by dust buildup inside the switch, as many people report that blowing in compressed air resolved their switch issues. It remains to be seen whether these types of issues will continue on the new model since it just launched, but given that it is these same switches, there is definitely a reason to have some slight concern. In between those main clicks is the primary scroll wheel. This wheel is Logitech's top-of-the-line MagSpeed scroll wheel. It uses electromagnets to create a dynamic scrolling experience. If you scroll slowly, it has tactile line-by-line scrolling. If you then spin it quickly or flick the wheel, it transitions seamlessly to a free spinning mode. Then, as it slows down, it automatically re-enters the tactile line-by-line scrolling. It's a really satisfying experience to use, and it's unlike scroll wheels from any other brand. If you prefer, you can also use the button behind the wheel to change it strictly to a free spinning mode as well. But that's not all. Because if you're able to install the Logitech Options Plus software, you can customize this scroll wheel in a number of ways. You can adjust the scrolling speed and scrolling direction. That's pretty normal and can usually be done in your operating system as well. Next, you can enable smooth scrolling, which is off by default, but which allows you to make movement on your screen a little bit less jumpy as you go up and down a page. This looks very nice when it works, but there have been apparently reported issues with compatibility that causes this smooth scrolling to not work great. So thankfully it's off by default, so you don't need the software to fix those issues. But if you feel like your scrolling is a bit jumpy, using the Options Plus software to enable this feature may help. The last two controls on here are the best. First, at the bottom is Smart Shift. This is the name for that feature where the mouse automatically moves between tactile and free spinning. Here, you can adjust the sensitivity of that change. At 100%, it takes very little effort to enter free spinning mode, whereas at 0%, it requires a lot more force for it to release into that free spinning. This lets you fine-tune how it works and get it just the way that you like it. You also have the option to turn Smart Shift off altogether if you want the scroll wheel to simply be a ratcheting tactile experience or just a fully free spinning one. Plus, if you turn it off, then the button next to the wheel will now change you between a full tactile mode and a full free spinning mode, which is more like a mouse with a traditional scroll wheel. Finally, if you've had the MX Master 3S, you may already know that every one of those scroll wheel controls already existed there. But not this last one. Scrolling Force, as it's called, is brand new on the MX Master 4, and it lets you change how large the tactile bumps are as you scroll. For me, anything below 25% might as well be free spinning. You can barely feel anything at all. But around 50%, you get a nice, soft, tactile experience. 75% is the default and feels about the same as the prior models, and 100% gives you this very firm experience where there is no mistaking whether you've scrolled or not. This is excellent if you're using this mouse for some casual gaming and want to be very clear when you've scrolled up or down. This entire level of customization is incredible for a single small piece on a mouse like this, and it's especially appreciated on the MagSpeed scroll wheel, which is easily my favorite component of this mouse line. Moving to the side of the mouse, this is where the largest changes on this new version have occurred. First, we have the obvious, the forward and back buttons. These buttons are the same size as before, but there's now less spacing between them, making it a little bit tougher to differentiate them by touch. They've also been moved just a bit further back on the mouse to make room for an additional button at the front of this line. This new location is a subtle change, but if you've got strong muscle memory for an older MX Master model, there might be a slight adjustment period. Above the forward and back buttons is the side scroll wheel. This has been extended so that it is slightly wider than before. It also sits slightly further back, again forcing an adjustment period for users of the old version of the mouse. Finally, the shape around the wheel has changed. Where the wheel previously stuck out of a slightly recessed cavity, it now sits more flush with this rounded edge on the side of the mouse. I really like how this looks with the new wheel, and it actually has a practical benefit as well. Because it's no longer trapped inside of a recessed area with physical barriers on either side, you now have far more range of motion. Where you would previously be limited by the side walls, you can now move much further, allowing you to traverse more across a page in just one single motion. However, despite it being beneficial in one area, it has been annoying in another. In using the side wheel, I've found that my thumb tends to drag against the surrounding plastic, which doesn't feel great, and it adds in some extra friction to the process as well. Because of the shape of my thumbs in particular, unless I adjust the position of the mouse entirely, I don't really have a good way that I can position my thumb without it rubbing on this back portion, at least a little bit. As a result, it actually even makes some noise, which you can hear as I scroll. This is certainly not the end of the world, and there's a good chance that the benefits will outweigh the costs for many of you watching. But personally, this tiny bit of rounded plastic near the thumb wheel is definitely one of my least favorite changes in this new generation. Now finally, we have the last two buttons on the side of the mouse, the relocated gesture button and the new Haptic Sense panel. What a name that is. I've saved these two for last intentionally because they share a common, not so great distinction. They are both wholly reliant on Logitech Options Plus. If you don't have the program installed, both of these buttons do absolutely nothing. The rest of the buttons that we've discussed all have a default behavior, and most or all of the functionality is available without the software installed, but not with these two buttons. They just click and that's it. If you can install the software, this new button in front of the forward and back buttons serves as a gesture button. This is actually a relocation of the gesture button that was previously located at the base of the thumb rest on the older versions. By default, the gestures will control window navigation, including opening Mission Control on Mac or the Start menu on Windows, plus going between multiple desktops as you move side to side. You can also choose between a couple of additional preset options or create your own gesture controls if you wish. The Haptic Sense panel is this whole piece of silicone at the bottom of the mouse. I think it's a little bit debatable whether you can really call this a button or not, since it feels like an Apple trackpad, which uses haptics to simulate the sensation of pressing a button. But after opening up the MX Master 4, it does seem like this panel indeed moves up and down as you press it, so I'm gonna call it a button personally. As long as you have Options Plus installed, this button gives you access to the Actions ring, which has some useful presets or can be customized. This panel is also, as the name implies, where the haptic engine lives, and we're gonna talk a lot more about that in the next section of this video. If you don't care about the gestures or about the actions ring, you can always reprogram these buttons to do something else entirely. This includes various actions, some AI features, smart actions, which basically lets you create your own custom macros, and even these spotlight effects, which are great for giving virtual presentations. Now that we've covered all of the buttons, here is a quick roundup of the button sounds across the board. Now let's go into more detail on the MX Master 4's new haptic sense panel and the actions ring that it activates. First of all, adding haptics to this mouse is a really unique feature that I don't really think anyone saw coming, which is pretty cool that they did that. The vibration that this mouse creates centers around this whole silicone side paddle. You can feel it around the whole mouse, but you definitely feel it most prominently here. Right off the bat, it is a bit strange to have the mouse vibrate in your hand. It's not a familiar feeling, even though it's something that I've felt from a phone or a video game controller for many years. For that reason, it definitely does get your attention when it goes off. The built-in features that utilize vibration, like letting you know that you've successfully paired your device or getting your attention when your battery is low, are helpful and work without the need for the Options Plus software. Whether this moves from a simple notification feature to a more game-changing innovation, though, really depends on the software and on software developers. With Options Plus installed, you get haptics connected to the actions ring and the ability for other software programs to add haptics in even more ways. Out of the gate, there is limited compatibility with just a small set of programs supported. The potential here is really interesting, though. This demo that Logitech provided shows vibration helping to let you know when you've successfully aligned one text box to another in Photoshop. I also envision your mouse vibrating to let you know when a meeting is about to begin, similar to how your phone vibrates when you have it on silent and get a notification. It would also be cool if certain system errors that play sound effects on your computer would instead vibrate the mouse if your volume was off. Maybe in Google Chrome, when I pull one tab out from a window, a small vibration could help to make that feel more impactful. There's a million ways that this could be used, but ultimately, you shouldn't buy new tech based on promises alone. So remember that this has very limited actual support at launch. In the future, it will depend on both adoption of this mouse over time, whether any new mice also have this feature, and on software developers at various companies creating the features that leverage it. Only those combination of factors will determine the true value that these haptics actually provide. Now let's talk more about the actions ring. For many people, the introduction of the haptic sense panel on the side of this mouse and the actions ring that it brings up will feel like very related new features. However, the actions ring isn't itself actually exclusive to the MX Master 4 model. It's also available for other mice that use the Options Plus software. That even includes the previous generation, MX Master 3 and 3S, for example. The real difference here is that there is now a dedicated button on the MX Master 4 that is specifically designed for this feature. Here are the default functions for the actions ring. For me, there's not a ton of value here, though it does provide an interesting new way to get to certain features, like taking a screenshot exclusively from using a mouse. If you use Options Plus, you have the opportunity to adjust any one of these functions. Some of the options for customization include full media controls, the ability to open any single application on your computer, like maybe you want a quick way to open up your calculator. You can activate a keyboard shortcut or use it to paste a specific character if you have something strange that you use regularly and don't want to remember a complicated keyboard shortcut. There's a couple of widgets available in case you want to utilize the world's smallest stopwatch. Like seriously, who's going to actually use this one? I have no idea. Finally, saving the best for last, there is Easy Switch. So yes, the MX Master 4 does still have the device switch button on the bottom of the mouse. However, the actions ring can now allow you to swap devices without having to lift up your mouse. It's not perfect, and I still wish that you could simply dedicate a button exclusively to it on top of the mouse, but something here is better than nothing. Now that you know what you can do with the actions ring, let's talk about how you can use it. The quickest way to use it is to press and hold the side panel, move your mouse over the item that you want to select, and then release to select it. If you are looking for efficiency, this is the way to go. You don't even have to be directly on the circle to select it. You can see as I move my mouse up, it stays selected well beyond the edge of the circle. Releasing anywhere that the circle is still highlighted will work. If you instead click the side panel rather than holding it, it will open up the ring and leave it open. Once you get here, clicking the side panel again will actually close the ring rather than selecting something. This feels a little bit counterintuitive since it's so different than the press, hold, release method. Instead, if you open the ring up with a click of the side panel, you need to use the left click on your mouse to select something. I'm really curious to see how this all evolves over time and whether people wind up utilizing it heavily or not. Personally, I don't see myself using it that much, but I'm open to trying out some different configurations and seeing if I can find something that works for me. If you have a great use case for the actions ring, let me know in the comments. Moving on, let's talk about connectivity. You can connect your mouse to pretty much any operating system that accepts a mouse input. That includes Mac, Windows, Linux, Chrome OS, iPad OS, and Android. Wireless connectivity on this model is also improved. There's a new high-performance chip that's supposedly 2 times more powerful, plus they have optimized the antenna placements to avoid some of the issues that people have had with connectivity on the prior models. That new chip and antenna lets you utilize the 3 different Bluetooth 5.1 connections, which can be switched using the multi-device button on the bottom of the mouse. It is annoying that this is still on the bottom of the mouse, but remember that you can add Easy Switch to that action ring, which at least is a small improvement. In addition to Bluetooth, there is a USB receiver included in the box for the regular version of this mouse. This, for the first time that I'm aware of, is Logitech's new USB-C version of their Logi Bolt receiver. This tiny little receiver still sticks out of your computer or dock about as far as the old USB-A model, but with the smaller port size, it is much smaller overall. This new small size means that it is almost certainly going to be easier to lose. It would have been nice if Logitech had a dedicated storage solution on the bottom of the mouse, but sadly there is not one. You technically could store the receiver in the USB-C charging port on the front of the mouse. It looks a little bit silly, and the receiver is quite hard to remove, but if you just need to get from point A to point B without losing it, I guess it does work. Against my better judgment, I also tried doing this while the mouse was on and in use, and it does still function. I have no idea though whether this is causing any sort of damage, so I do not recommend that you do it personally. Please do not come back to me if your mouse breaks because you decided to store the receiver in the mouse's charging port. Outside of wireless, the other common connectivity method that is not available on this mouse, or almost any of Logitech's productivity mice for that matter, is a wired mode. You cannot connect this mouse directly to your computer via a cable. You can use the mouse while it is plugged in and charging, but you're still going to have to be connected either wirelessly via Bluetooth or with the Logi Bolt. That is one of the biggest problems that this mouse has with connectivity, but there is another, far more contentious topic: the polling rate. For the uninitiated, polling rates are the frequency with which your device communicates to your computer. So in the case of a mouse, the polling rate number, expressed in hertz, is the number of times per second that the mouse is going to report its location. The higher the number, the more data is sent, and the more quickly your computer can recognize where your mouse has moved and therefore reflect that movement on your screen. When you connect the MX Master 4 via Bluetooth, it uses 125 hertz, so 125 times per second. This is standard, as Bluetooth input devices, like mice, can't go any higher than 125 hertz. So if you've ever used a Bluetooth mouse, you've used it at 125 hertz. With other mice, especially high-end gaming mice, it's common for them to offer higher polling rates through either a direct wired connection or a 2.4 gig USB receiver. Now, you'll typically see this max out at around 1000 hertz, but newer devices can get 2000, 4000, or even 8000 hertz. The primary benefits here include lower latency, which is that lag time between when you move your mouse and when it's reflected on screen, which can be important with gaming, and also smoother mouse movements on screen, especially if you have super high resolution or super high refresh rate monitors. The primary drawbacks include more drain on your mouse's battery if you're using it wirelessly, and potentially a bigger strain on your CPU since it's receiving much more data that it needs to process. So that brings us back to Logi Bolts. Since there is no direct wired mode available on this mouse, this is our only hope to get higher polling rates. However, Logi Bolt isn't like most other USB receivers. It actually runs on Bluetooth Low Energy. So it too is capped at 125 hertz. In order to get higher polling rates on this mouse, Logitech would have had to completely overhaul their receiver technology that they specifically designed to work across their product line, and which is also a key part of their enterprise strategy due to the security and corporate controls that they've built into the little dongle. So what does this all mean? Well, for a lot of people, it means that you won't even consider a mouse like this. There's a large contingency of people on the internet who believe that high polling rates are essential to a good mouse experience. There's yet another contingency that recognizes the potential power of high polling rates, but really only cares about it in the context of competitive gaming, which obviously is not the primary focus of this mouse. Finally, there are people who exclusively do mundane office work on basic corporate issued hardware who have no issue whatsoever with 125 Hz and whose eyes are probably glazing over a bit at this point in time. No matter which of those camps that you're in, I think that you're right. The way that you use your mouse is incredibly personal. Just because you have the same job title as someone else doesn't mean that you guys are going to use your tools in the same way either. Some people have a 240 Hz 4K monitor, and others are using 1080p 30 Hz. Some people might look at the exact same mouse movement and call it jittery and unacceptable. Others might think it's totally normal. My point is that context matters, expectations matter a lot, it all depends on a myriad of factors, and no one is wrong for hating on or loving a 125 Hz mouse. All that being said, many people have reported jittery and lagging connections on prior MX Master models. In theory, the chip and antenna improvements I described earlier should help with this, and they did improve connections slightly in my very rudimentary tests, where I simply got as far away from my computer as I could to see how stable the connection was on the 3S compared to the 4. Despite that, these improvements may not resolve every issue for every person. For many people, these problems are likely attributable to simple wireless interference or other connection issues to their device. This could be because your mouse is too far away from your device. It could be because of other physical objects in the way, like if you have your computer in a cabinet next to your desk or underneath a thick wood desk, for example. It could be interference from other wireless devices in the area. If you experience these problems and can't seem to resolve them, try getting a USB extension cable to move the Logi Bolt closer to your mouse. This gives it the best chance of maintaining a strong connection, even if there are other factors around your desk that make it tougher. For other people, you could have a legitimate issue with the 125 Hz polling rate if you have some combination of a high resolution monitor, a high refresh rate monitor, certain workflows and programs that require extreme levels of precision, a desire to play fast-paced games with this mouse, etc. I personally have never had an issue with an MX Master device that stems from the polling rate. My experience has always been very smooth and very responsive, but I will not discount the experiences that other folks have had and who have shared their frustrations on the topic in the past. Moving now to customization, this mouse, just like all of Logitech's recent products, uses Logi Options Plus. As far as proprietary software programs go for mice and keyboards, Options Plus is way more polished than most, which makes sense coming from a big company like Logitech. However, the huge downside is that you must install it on your computer and have it running in the background for the custom changes that you make to actually work. If you work from a corporate computer that prohibits the installation of third-party software, this may be a non-starter for you right out of the gate. With other mice, you can often make changes on a different computer, like a personal desktop computer or something like that, and then carry them over to a work machine. But unfortunately, that's not possible here either, as there is no onboard memory to store changes on the mouse itself. This means that if you can't install the software, you get no actions ring, no customization on the haptics or the scroll wheels, and no changing of functionality on any of the buttons. It's certainly still a usable mouse in its default configuration, but it's not nearly as exciting as what you can actually do with the software. If you can download the software, you have the ability to change the button and wheel behavior on the Buttons tab. This includes getting to the Actions Ring controls, plus you can set application-specific controls in addition to your global ones. The Point Scroll Press tab is probably my favorite set of adjustments because it lets you change a few aspects of the physical controls of how you actually interact with the mouse, which you can't do on a lot of other mice. This is where you control the sensitivity of the haptic sense panel, which I tend to increase to high to prevent any accidental clicks when you're just squeezing your mouse. You can set the speed and direction of the thumb wheel and the overall pointer speed. Finally, you can make all of the granular adjustments to the main MagSpeed scroll wheel that we discussed earlier. On the haptic feedback tab, you can turn off haptics or control the intensity. Personally, the default of medium is actually a little aggressive for me, so I tend to move it down to at least low. On the easy switch tab, you can see the devices that you have assigned to each of the 3 device locations, 1, 2, and 3. If you have multiple computers on this list and both have Options Plus installed, then you can use the Flow tab to enable the ability to move your mouse between devices and even to copy and paste between machines as well. It's a pretty solid system that works a lot like some of the pre-installed Mac OS features that work across different Mac devices, which is really cool. Finally, the Settings tab primarily lets you update the firmware or restore to default settings if you wind up unhappy with however you've changed them. Overall, I think that customization is a little bit frustrating because this is a solid set of features that inevitably get way less use than they could because of the requirements for software installation. For some of the features, like Flow that lets you go between 2 computers, it seems like this would logically require software that's installed on your computer in order to function. But for just basic setting changes or button configurations, I wish that Logitech would save this in memory on the mouse so that you could take advantage of at least some of this customization, even if you have to abide by the rules of your corporate IT overlords. For the sensor, Logitech is using the same dark field sensor used in their previous MX Master 3S. It works great on just about any surface, including on glass. It can go up to 8,000 dpi. It's not a sensor that's meant to compete with the latest and greatest in the gaming category, but it is very solid nonetheless. The battery life on the MX Master 4 is the same 70 days of use as the MX Master 3S. This is despite the fact that they added in the haptics, which inevitably use more battery than before. To do this, they increased the size of the battery from 500 milliamp hours up to 650. The mouse is also capable of quick charging, getting 3 hours of use from just 1 minute of charging. This can be super useful to get you through the end of your day if your mouse happens to die in the middle of your work. Finally, related to the battery and just to repairability in general, there are exposed screws on the bottom of the mouse that make it much easier than before for disassembly and repair. They even show you how to remove the battery in the materials in the box. This is presented as a step to complete before recycling the mouse at the end of its life, but it would work for battery replacement as well if the battery has some issues down the road. This is a really solid step for Logitech, and I'd expect that the Logitech Repair Hub on iFixit's website should be updated before too long to include replacement batteries for this newer model as well, should you need one. Moving to value and pricing, the MX Master lineup has long been priced at $100. In April of 2025, they increased that price to $120. Now, at launch for this new MX Master 4 in September of 2025, it's also priced at $120. This is a hefty price for a productivity mouse. And although you may look at it and see it as the same price as the 3S, since the majority of the life of the 3S was spent at $100, in my mind, this is a $20 price increase. For that $20 price increase, in the box you get the mouse, obviously, but you do not get a charging cable. This is pretty crazy in my mind. Now, I'm sure that Logitech would argue that people already have USB-C cables and that it is a good environmental choice to avoid shipping ones that oftentimes won't get used. In my opinion, all products should ship with the necessary accessories for them to function. And in this case, once this battery dies after 70 days or so of use, a charging cable is necessary. It gets worse though, because the only other thing in the box is the USB-C Logi Bolt receiver. However, that is not the case if you elect to go for the 4 Mac version. Now, if you've watched my channel for a while, you already know how I feel about the 4 Mac series, and I already mentioned earlier in this video that I did a whole other video talking about the regular versus 4 Mac version of this mouse. But I will just reiterate again for the people in the back. The 4 Mac model of this mouse is exactly the same and doesn't include the Logi Bolt receiver. You should not buy it unless you can get it on sale or you are 100% certain that you do not need the USB receiver. All right, now let's talk about the differentiators and deal breakers for this regular version specifically. For the differentiators, this is still an iconic and incredible design for comfort and for productivity, even if it did get slightly less comfortable with this new version. The hard plastic shell and silicone sides should be more durable and are expected to hold up far better in the long term than the old soft touch materials on the 3 and 3S. Time will tell for certain, but my expectation is that there's going to be a big improvement. MagSpeed continues to be the best scroll wheel that I've ever used. The multi-device pairing works excellently and makes it seamless to move between devices, even if most of you will still have to pick up your mouse to do so. The haptics are an interesting innovation that might be more of a gimmick in the long term, but certainly has the potential to change the way that we interact with our mice in the best case future scenario. Connectivity is improved with a better chip and relocated antenna, but I'd be the first one to put a big ol' asterisk on that one because we'll need more people in more situations to try this out before we can truly declare that it's a success. The USB-C receiver is long overdue in my opinion. The mouse is more repairable than ever before with those screws open on the bottom. And finally, the software is excellent and offers unmatched levels of customization, like changing the size of the individual tactile bumps on the main scroll wheel, which is just a super cool little innovation. On the potential deal breaker side of things, the fact that 2 of the main buttons on this mouse requires Options Plus to be installed and running in order to do anything is kind of crazy. And since many people will use this mouse with a corporate computer that cannot install third-party software, and there continues to be no onboard memory to make changes and bring them over from another machine, that continues to be a massive potential deal breaker. The size of the mouse remains large and not great for people with small hands. It's also gotten even heavier than before, plus it is slightly less comfortable, for me at least, due to some very subtle changes in the shape and the fact that the more durable plastic isn't quite as nice to feel in the hand. The switches used are the same ones that they had in the prior model, which have been known to have some issues. There's still no wired connectivity available. The polling rate is still just 125 Hertz. And finally, it's a pricey mouse at $120. So is this the best productivity mouse ever? Well, it's complicated. It is absolutely a great mouse. I love it personally, but there's a ton of people who will take objection to one or more of those potential deal breakers, and that's okay. There's no such thing as an objectively perfect mouse, but there can be a perfect mouse for you. This might be it. Saving money and getting the MX Master 3S on sale might be it as well. That's still a great option if you're okay with the risks around the material degrading and if the new features like haptics don't really interest you. If you're really hung up on the 125 Hz polling rate, check out my review for the Keychron M6 8K. It has a lot of the same benefits of the MX Master, but with an 8000 Hz polling rate and customization via a web app so that you can actually use it with your work computer, plus it's only $70. If you don't care much about the bells and whistles like side scroll wheels and just want a comfortable mouse targeted at productivity, this is the Razer Pro Click V2 and it's a nice option. Just note that Razer suffers from the same software reliance issues as Logitech does, and this mouse is also pretty pricey at $100. Finally, if you want a sleeper pick, look at the Logitech M720 Triathlon mouse. It's got a lot of trade-offs for sure. Basic scroll wheel, no silent clicks, less advanced sensor, no side scroll wheel, unifying receiver rather than Logi Bolt, runs on a AA battery rather than being rechargeable, and so on. But it has a tilt wheel for side-to-side scrolling. The shape is actually pretty similar, just a little smaller and a bit less sculpted than the MX Master. It has a button for changing devices on the top of the mouse rather than on the bottom. It also still has a hidden gesture button like the previous MX Masters, and it's only $45. Now, these mice are all compelling for various different reasons, and only you can decide which one of them is right for you. If you want my pick with all of these in front of me, I'm personally going with the MX Master 4. If I do need to save money, I care deeply about polling rates, or I desperately want to be able to customize with a web app, then I'm going to pick up the Keychron. But what about you? Let me know in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please consider using your current mouse to click that subscribe button if you found this video useful, and consider using my affiliate links which help to support the channel if you plan to buy your next mouse anytime soon. Thanks again. I'll see you in the next one.